Hi there, I'm Dr. Norris Goldberg. I'm the owner here at Chiropractic Corrective Care, and today I want to talk to you about the three most common causes of migraines. So the three types are vascular, CSF or cerebral spinal fluid flow alterations, and spinal cord tension. So I want to show you how those three different components add up and how it may result in a migraine. So typically migraines, very common, neurological disorder where you're going to get head pain, typically on one side, oftentimes right behind the eye. Some, about 20% of them actually will start to get an aura where they'll see little like sticulations around the side of their vision, or maybe get blurred vision, or maybe even almost blackout, right? Just everyone's a little bit different on that front. The first most common cause of the migraines is the vascular component. So specifically with your spine, you have two different portals of entry for blood to go in and out of your brain, okay? You've got your carotid arteries sending blood into the brain, and then the jugular veins coming out. Those are the two biggest ones, but those are really focused more on the front of the brain. On the back of the brain, we have our vertebral arteries, right? So our vertebral arteries actually run up through the cervical spine and then join to connect into what we call the basilar artery, which then runs up in through the base of your skull here through the foramen magnum, that big hole, right? And that's actually the same hole that your spinal cord comes out. So those blood vessels actually and arteries are supplying the most vital elements of your brain, the brainstem, where the brain really connects to the rest of your body. If that part is interrupted, it's like taking the on-ramp to the highway away. You're not gonna be able to get onto the highway. You're not gonna be able to communicate with the rest of your body, or your body won't be able to communicate with the rest of your brain properly, okay? So what we find is when you have a misalignment here, actually right where these elastics are to hold this model together, that's actually right where the vertebral artery goes through your atlas bone. So when this top bone in the spine misaligns and it shifts left or right, or maybe side to side, it can actually kink down on the artery and alter the amount of blood that you're getting to that part of the brain, all right? On top of that, there's a neurological component. The misalignment to the top of the spine that affects the brainstem also affects your autonomic nervous system, both your sympathetic and your parasympathetic branches, which are directly responsible for the openness or the patency of your blood vessels. And so if that part of your nervous system is being altered, you could have blood vessels that are cramping down and not getting enough blood flow to certain parts of your brain. Your brain is extremely sensitive to chemical changes, so essentially it's going to cause the pain receptors to go off, and you're going to get more or less a brain cramp or a headache or a migraine, right? So the second cause of migraines is also very similar in the sense that it's caused by brain sensitivity, but via the cerebral spinal fluid flow, right? So CSF flow. CSF is essentially a purified fluid from your blood, right? So your blood-brain barrier takes the blood vessels, or sucks from the blood vessels. It sucks the fluid out. It leaves the blood cells behind, like the red blood cells and your white blood cells, but it takes the good stuff out, the glucose and the oxygen, right? So that's where the power is for the brain, but it also is responsible for getting the bad stuff out. So it gets the CO2 and the toxins out of the brain. And what we find is, and we can now see this with advancing technologies like phonar MRI, where we can see fluids moving around the brain, we can actually see that when someone has an upper cervical misalignment, their CSF is not flowing evenly. They may have areas of high pressure or low pressure. They may have areas of really no flow happening and stagnation of this fluid, in which case the brain, again, is going to become hypersensitive to certain things. And that's what I really believe is the cause of what triggers are, is that your brain's already on this hypersensitivity kick, and then you just add one more thing in, like wine or chocolate, and that's enough to just put it over the edge and trigger that migraine to occur, okay? So the third and final cause of the migraines is spinal cord tension. And the way that comes about is that your brain, sitting up here inside of your skull, is connected to the inside and attached via what's called the dura mater, right? It's this hard protective sheath that really just connects the bone and anchors the brain in place so that it's not just bopping around. It's kind of like a suspension system where it holds it right there. And the CSF fluid fills that space and also creates a cushioning and protective mechanism, okay? But what happens is, as you get into the spinal cord connects to the brainstem, runs down through the spine, and so that it's not just slapping about inside this tunnel of bones here, right? What it does is it's actually anchored or suspended via the dentate ligaments. And those ligaments go all the way from C1 all the way down the spine until it gets down to the final ligament. You have usually one on both sides. It gets all the way down to what we call the filum terminale, which anchors to your tailbone, okay? So what we find though is with an upper cervical misalignment, if it's shifting left or right or slipping side to side, what that's doing, it's actually tugging on the dentate ligaments, which then tugs on the spinal cord, and this will actually change the shape of the spinal cord from its normal kind of like oval or bean shaped appearance and distort it in one direction or the other. And the problem with that is it affects both the blood flow to that specific part of the brainstem, which also includes the origin or the nuclei to your cranial nerves, which go back up into the brain and give you sensation, to your face, like your trigeminal nerve. It can also affect the dorsal rami, like your C2 ramus, which is the sensation on the back of your skull. And it can affect neuroplasmic flow, which is the actual flow of the electrolytes through the nerves and creating the electrical signals. So both the blood flow and nerve flow can be affected, and essentially it's like pinching your whole spinal cord at one time. It can cause a lot of problems besides migraines, but oftentimes migraines are a result of that. And that is why upper cervical chiropractors have such a good outcome with migraine patients. Now, it's very different than traditional chiropractic care, where there's a lot of twisting and cracking and big thrusting adjustments. With upper cervical specific care, we're gonna do a very gentle adjustment to the top bone in your spine. Typically it's C1, sometimes you're gonna be getting your C2 adjusted, but typically for the sake of simplicity, we're gonna talk about adjusting C1. We're gonna take a specialized set of x-rays so we can actually analyze to what degree is that bone misaligned relative to your head and your lower neck, and to what degree do we really need to get that corrected? What angles do we come from when we do the adjustment? And just like a really good pool shot where you're banking that ball off the wall into the corner pocket, it's all about your angles and a very gentle touch. And realigning your atlas bone is no different. We use angles, we use measurements, and we make sure that when we redo the adjustment, we can see neurological changes right away. And typically, long term, that means less migraines for you. So if you have any questions, reach out to us. We'd love to tell you more.